Do you want to destroy evil? Come on, let's go and slay. You never draw me anymore. Just throw me at the floor, and then you walk away. We used to be 5 buddies, but now Shashara's gone. I wish you would tell me why. Do you want to destroy evil? Doesn't have to be that evil.
Go away, Nightblood.
Okay, bye. Is that better?
I love it.
All right, great. Thanks to ChatGPT for helping get the ball started in writing the song lyrics, and apologies to Kristen Bell and anyone who's a fan of Frozen.
I love it. It's perfect.
Great. So, this is our post-read episode for Warbreaker. We've got spoilers for the text of Warbreaker, including some things that are in the annotations on Brando Sando's website. I guess as a content warning, the book, and therefore this episode, deal pretty heavily with sex, coercion, and sexual coercion. So if that is not something for you,
You might want to skip this one.
yeah, you can skip this one. So I think we talked...
What?
Oh.
Do you want to welcome the readers to our podcast?
Oh, yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cosmere Casual, your casual reader's guide to the Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded.
A couple weeks.
We're off our rhythm. It's okay, I guess.
Anyways, he's Nick.
I'm Nick.
I'm AJ.
Yeah.
Now we can talk about
Warbreaker. Cool. So I think we were talking about like the setup for this episode, and because there's just so much
Everything.
I guess much. There's a lot of lying going on in the story, and like the protagonists all get deceived quite a bit. I think
and it's not linear storytelling either.
Yeah.
Like you learn some things and then you have to go back and fill in holes and everything. Like it makes sense in the story, but like if you're trying to get it all straight in your head, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah. So I think the way we're gonna do this episode is it's gonna start with a boring history lesson about what the setting and sort of the history of the world. Then we're gonna go into and diving in and including stuff about the magic system. Then we're gonna do a high level plot recap of the book. And then we're going to talk about our favorite moments and the themes, as well as anything else we want to talk about.
Okay.
So, history of the world. In the beginning. Oh, wait, hold on.
Well, in the beginning, as much as we know.
Yeah. So, I guess not in the text of the book. The name of this world is Nalthis, and the magic system here is tied to the Shard endowment. Yeah. So, back in the text of the story Warbreaker, the story is set on the coasts of the Inner Sea, in the country that's called Hallandren? Hallandren? Whatever. With the capital city, Tatalir. And it's kind of a tropical paradise, metropolis. And it's also the only place in the world that these special flowers called the Tears of Edgley can grow. The Tears of Edgley are... they're flowers, but they produce very vibrant dyes that hold fast in any kind of cloth. So inherently, they are very valuable, and it makes the setting, besides being just a tropical, there's, they talk about going into the jungle, they talk about there being a jungle, around in the country.
But these flowers are what make up the economy of Hallandren.
Yeah, they make up the economy, but it provides a very vibrant, very bright sort of vibe.
None of this is really that important to the story.
Well,
I'm assuming some of this will come into larger play later in the sequel or other Cosmere, but for this story, you don't really have to pay attention that much to the flowers.
So part of the magic of the world, is that everyone is born with a single breath, which is like a quantified unit of magic. And people can put their breath into objects and have them do simple commands. And that the magic is called awakening. Or they can give away their breath or sell it for a lot of money. Awakeners are people who, using dozens or hundreds of breaths at a time, can create more powerful or more complex awakenings. And even just holding on to large numbers of breaths grants special abilities at defined, thresholds of breath. So I think, what is it? 50 breaths reaches the first heightening. And as you go up, you get they get
more abilities.
More abilities like perfect pitch, resistance to disease, agelessness, super color perception.
And so long as you were born on Nalthis, anyone can be an awakener.
Yes. And the way the magic sort of works is that to awaken an object, they give a verbal command, visualizing what they want at the same time while touching the object. The breath from the awakener goes into the object along with color from around it. The color, the breath, and the command are all essential for awakening. So you can't awaken in a completely gray area, or if your mouth is gagged, or if you have no breath, or if you can't touch the object that you want to awaken. And typically,
there's caveats in there.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like high level, that's sort of the basics of it, right?
Like if you're the God King, then you don't need to use verbal commands.
Right. Because he's just so
innately powerful.
Yeah, he's got tens of thousands of breaths. Another part of the magic system, there's sort of a special exception around awakening when it comes to lifeless, capital L. When an awakener puts breath into a piece of cloth, they can retrieve the breath from that cloth afterwards, after it's done whatever job they want it to do. But when you try to awaken a dead body, they come as lifeless, and that breath is spent. You can't get it back. And
they describe it as the breath being sticky to the corpse.
Yeah. And for things like cloth, they you give one command and that's all you get before you need to reawaken it. But for lifeless, where you put one you put your breath in there one time, you can give it additional commands as you go on. Additionally, the color from the lifeless, all lifeless are gray because that's where the color comes from. It comes from the body itself. So that really, I know you don't like the lifeless, but they really give a strong zombie vibe because.
Well, that's why I don't like them.
Yeah. But they are fueled by the breath. Like they don't live in traditional ways.
They don't need to eat or anything.
Another part of the magic of the world is that sometimes when people die, they come back as capital R returned. And this especially happens when they die in virtuous ways. So
to the best of our knowledge.
To the best of our knowledge, right? The returned physically appear as more idealized people. They're taller, they're more muscular, they're bustier. And
they actually take on the form of what they think is most beautiful.
Right. And the returned are special in a lot of ways. They see visions of the future sometimes. They, like we said, they come back as idealized versions of themselves, but without memories. And they come back each with a single breath, but it's a very special breath. They call it a divine breath, that it's somehow equivalent to hundreds of your more mundane breaths. And the returned can give up that breath once in one awakening, and that
to heal someone,
to heal somebody, and it's to perform a miracle. But because they are brought back to life by that breath, if it leaves them, then they just die. Right. The other thing about the returned is they get 7 or 8 days to live. And then they need to have
their body needs to consume one breath a week.
Yeah, and more mundane. They don't, a
mundane breath. But if they run out of mundane breaths to consume, then their body will consume the divine breath.
And then they die for real that time, for permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's sort of how the magic system works in the setting. I think in terms of the history of the world, 300 years ago, well, I guess before 300 years ago, there were 5 returned in particular that were very influential. And they were the 5 scholars. And so they, at working together, they all, made huge advancements in awakening. One of them found out that if you replace the blood of the lifeless with a kind of ichor alcohol, they
last longer.
They're stronger. They're more powerful. Another one found a way to make lifeless with a single breath, so it became much cheaper to have immortal soldiers, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Another of the scholars developed a way to awaken metal or steel, which is harder to do in world because it's so far removed from anything that has ever been living.
Yeah, it's easier to awaken things that are somehow
closer to being human.
Yeah, whether you cut a cloth into the shape of a human, you make a little straw person out of material. Yeah.
But then Shashara and Vasher make Nightblood a sentient sword with a command to destroy evil, and it is basically a super weapon, right? And with all of these technological advances in Awakening happening at once, as well as there were just several countries and different people living in the area, something triggered what they call in world as the many war, which feels a lot of ways like World War I or something like that, where it was just a lot of different people fighting. It was the first really destructive war that they've had in this world.
Yeah.
And I guess the prominent figures that play in the many war were Khalad, who seems like fantasy Hitler or something, where he's basically blamed as having started the many war with Khalad's phantoms, which were somehow just very bad, lifeless. And then the other key figure is Peacegiver, who is credited with ending the many war. Which
at the end of this book was revealed that
they're the same person.
Vasher, who is one of the 5 scholars, is all of those people.
Yes, but
not that he was trying to deceive people. He was just like, yeah, it's weird. Yeah, history can't put it together that it was one person, so they just had to associate different names.
Yeah, but in terms of setting up the politics of this book, the Idrian royal family before the Many War had ruled in Hallandren. There were many people in Hallandren, and one of those groups of people was the Pon Call, who
they were a separate country that just kind of got taken over by Hallandren.
Yeah, but as a result of the Many War, the Idrian royal family had to flee into the mountains, I think to the north. They fled into the mountains, and they were sort of, there's always been a threat of violence between the Idrian royal family and the Court of the Gods, or the Returned, who presently rule in Hallandren. But 20 years or so before the start of this book, so you figure 200 plus years later, there was sort of a treaty between the Idrian royal family and the God Kings of Hallandren.
The Court of Gods, yeah.
Yeah, to marry off the eldest daughter of the Idrian royal family when she came of age to the God King. So that way, basically, they would merge their both claims to the throne again. And so that's where we start off. It's 20 years later. It's the eldest daughter of Ravenna is of age. But I guess the political tension in the book is such that everybody thinks that war is inevitable anyway, right?
That's
That's sort of like how the vibes
Even
are.
though, the marriage should have calmed everything.
Yeah, the marriage should have calmed everything, but there's just such lingering animosity between the Idrians, who feel like they were removed from their homeland, the Hallandrins, who view the Idrians as rebels, and there's such mutual mistrust. And in particular, it seems like the Idrians restrict trade through the mountains. So there's lingering animosity between the two countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they view war as sort of inevitable, even in light of the marriage starting to pass. So there are 3 main plot lines with 4 point of view characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the overarching tension in the book is kind of a will they, won't they have a war between Hallandren and Idris. So the 4 main characters are Ciri, the youngest daughter of the Idris royal family, Vivenna, the eldest daughter, and then Lightsong, who's just
a returned.
He's one of the returned in the court of gods in Hallandren. And then definitely 4th is Vasher and sort of Nightblood, who is through most of the book just a mysterious figure. You don't exactly know what he's up to. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? You just know that you get his point of view sometimes.
We don't get enough of Vasher, but we had to not get him to make the story work.
I don't know. I feel like I'd rather be left wanting more. You know what I mean? And he leaves us wanting more.
Yes, that is certainly true. But the bigger kind of overall thing happening in this book is Brandon really identified this book as all about reversals.
Yeah.
So everything that he did with Mistborn, he wanted to flip the script in this book.
Yeah.
So instead of having, this all-powerful Lord Ruler, we have kind of a puppet God King.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the first.
That's one of the reversals.
Yeah, I mean, there is he is portrayed as all powerful God King. His name is his title is the God King, Susubran, right?
Right, but then
it comes out, yeah.
And then the priests are a little bit more powerful in this book than they were in Mistborn.
Yep.
And then instead of having, a friendly heist gang that we had in Mistborn, we have
you still have a crew.
Evil mercenaries.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny because like in Mistborn, you're rooting for the crew of mercenaries to overthrow the God King, right? The Lord Ruler. And then in this book, well, yeah, there's still a crew of mercenaries working to start a rebellion and undercut the God King, but they're the bad guys.
Well, we find that out. And then Vivenna and Ciri, it was all about reversing their roles and how they grow as characters.
They each become more well-rounded, from it.
Yes.
From having that role reversal.
But yes, and then, reversal is the key word for this book, very much on purpose by Brandon.
Yeah, and everybody has all of your main characters except Vasher and Nightblood, they each have an arc where they end up basically 180 degrees from where they started, right? Where for, I guess, just to go through their plot arcs and everything, Ciri starts out as an impulsive young girl who's sort of
no responsibility.
Superfluous, no responsibilities. But over the course of the book, she becomes politically savvy and a completely regal queen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because Ciri spends the first part of the book mostly in fear, in where she's afraid of the priest, she's afraid of Hollander in general, and she's most especially afraid of her husband, the God King Susubran. But by steps, she starts to realize that nothing is really as it seems in the court of gods, and in particular, she realizes that Susubran's tongue has been cut out, and she starts to educate him and learn about him, and even fall in love, right? She does spend most of the book being manipulated by the scribe Bluefingers, and being pit against Susubran's priests.
Who do have her best interest in heart.
Who do ultimately have her best interest at heart. And so the flow of her arc is kind of, she's afraid of being violated by Susubran, right? Where she's definitely like, she is afraid of being raped, right? And then she comes to know Susubran and she doesn't worry about that anymore and comes to love him. Then she starts to worry about what the priests will do if she doesn't become pregnant and produce an heir. And then she becomes worried about what happens if she does become pregnant and produce an heir, because she finds out that the God Kings and their spouses basically give up their breaths and die shortly after they have an heir. So finally, at the end of the book, she recognizes the manipulation of Bluefingers, and she's more imminently focused on surviving and escaping. I don't know. She definitely, so she has a full arc. She goes from, where am I trying to say with this? I don't know.
I don't know. That was a lot of detail.
Yeah, but like, she strikes me as more than anybody else like a damsel in distress, right? Throughout pretty much the whole book, even as she takes more agency, like in the nitty gritty of things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see her in that light.
I don't know. I kind of, yeah. That's the way I saw it. But Vivenna is sort of the opposite, right?
Vivenna is such a frustrating character.
Right. Yeah. So she starts out haughty, the haughty princess, but then she gets brought low as a beggar, by the midpoint of the book, right?
Okay. You just skipped a whole lot.
I did.
Sure.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like at the top level, that's the key reversal she goes through, right? And then she learns that she has a lot.
To me, it's more that she grew up thinking that she was vitally important, and then at the last minute, her father took that all away from her and was like, "No, I'm not sending you."
Yeah.
And then she feels completely lost. Like, what is her life supposed to be? And then her whole life she grew up thinking that she was going to go to Hallandren, so it doesn't surprise me that much that she would go to Hallandren thinking that, telling herself that she would go save her sister, but really her whole life was leading to this moment and it got taken from her, so she took it upon herself to go to Hallandren. And I mean, the first part of the book, you're just like, you're not even thinking about Ciri. Like, you said you came to Hallandren to save Ciri, and you're not even thinking about her.
Yeah.
So she definitely she grew in this book, but she's got a ways to go, man.
Yep.
Which is what the sequel is supposed to be all about.
Well, we'll see. I don't know. There isn't a sequel yet, so
there will be, though.
Maybe. So I guess Vivenna's plot. She starts out as the prim and proper, princess of Idris. And she's, been destined her whole life to be the bride to the dreaded evil God King Susebron. Wink. But after her father, the king, sends Ciri instead, like you said, she's sort of aimless. So she sneaks off with her friend Parlin, to try and rescue Ciri. But she gets intercepted by Denth and his mercenaries when she's looking for her Idrian spy, contact. And Denth and his mercenaries, charm her and immediately start pushing her against her values, right?
By the way, if it's not clear, it was Bluefingers that hired Denth.
Yes. Yeah.
So Bluefingers has been working this whole time to create war between Hallandren and Idris, so that they're distracted by the war, so that his home country
can pull off
Pon Call can successfully rebel and break from Hallandren.
Right. And so Denth, who is hired by Bluefingers, charms and wins over Vivenna, and
because supposedly it's easier to attach themselves to Vivenna and make her believe that they're helping her as opposed to just keeping her captive.
Yeah. And so they sort of misdirect her, and they point her toward, they say, well, the best thing that she can do for her people and keep up as being a princess is to cripple Hallandren's military capabilities. And the sort of irony is that the thing she does in the first half of the book to try to cripple Hallandren, well, they end up pushing them closer to war,
which is not good for Idris.
Which is not actually what she wants. There's no chance of them
coming out for the better with war.
Right. And so about halfway through the book, and she sees Vasher, every now and again, and she knows that Denth and Vasher have history and that they hate each other, but she doesn't really know what's going on, other than she's just afraid of Vasher.
She doesn't have any idea what's going on with anything.
Right. But about halfway through the book, there's a chaotic scene that I kind of want to dive into more later, but she gets separated from both Denth and Vasher, and Denth thinks that she's gone over to Vasher. So when she comes back and sees her friend Parlin tortured to death in Denth's basement, she realizes that she's been betrayed. And that's the first big oh shit kind of moment, right? And then
it's a big turning point in the book.
Big turning point in the book.
One of several.
Yeah. And she manages to escape from Denth then, but she loses all of her breath in the process and spends a week in abject poverty and sickness on the streets in the ghettos, before she's found and rescued by Vasher. After she joins up with Vasher, she's a lot less judgmental of other people, and she's much more focused on actually trying to prevent war and basically undoing all the stuff she did in the first half of the book. And she's less strict about what tools she'll use to get there, where even though it's heretical for Idrians, she learns how to perform awakenings. Gasp, heresy. So I guess my big thing with her is that she definitely, like, she feels like, I get, it's really easy to be frustrated with her in the first half of the book, but she does start to, she gets to put on her rescuer hat, and she gets to save Vasher in the climax.
She does. And I mean, the beginning and end of her story, where she grew up with all of this responsibility and weight on her shoulders, and at the end of the book, she becomes how Ciri was in the beginning, and just kind of was like, well, I don't feel like I have anything left to do here. I'm just going to follow Vasher. So totally spontaneous, carefree kind of a vibe.
Right. But it's a different a different kind of spontaneous and carefree.
I know,
right?
but it is still a 180 from
Yes.
from the beginning of her story.
But she seems more at peace, whereas both Ciri and Vivenna, at the start of the book when they, realize that before Ciri realizes that she's gonna be married off, and after Vivenna, realizes it, like they both seem kind of restless and rebellious, whereas Vivenna at the end of the book, she just, she seems a little bit mellower, in my opinion. You're giving me a look.
I am struggling to understand what you mean.
Yeah. It's maybe worth noting that I only got halfway through writing up my notes. So sorry, listener. Where I feel like in the beginning chapters, Ciri she's rebellious, right? She's, doing things she's not supposed to do, but she's also doing them because she's not supposed to do them, right? She goes off and rides the horses and picks wildflowers and,
I don't know if I would say that she's mellow, but she now has she has more direction.
Vivenna at the end?
No, Ciri.
Oh, tell me more.
But what?
Well, why do you think Ciri had more of a direction? And I guess, are you talking about at the beginning of the book? I'm lost.
Me too.
Okay. So, yeah. But I guess for I don't know. I get the feeling at the end of the book with Vivenna, and she's deciding not to go back to her home, and instead she decides to follow Vasher around. She seems like she's just more interested in learning about the world, right? She's less self-absorbed.
Well, I think part of it is she needs to get away to find out who she is.
There's that too, yeah. So, but that's Vivenna and Vivenna's plot. Lightsong is one of my favorite Brandon Sanderson characters. He feels like he's straight out of an Oscar Wilde play.
I am not the biggest fan of Lightsong.
Well, I like him enough for both of us, thanks. But Lightsong is one of the returned Lightsong the Bold, and he is so thoroughly convinced of his own worthlessness and that of the other, court of gods, that he goes as far as being like agnostic, right? Which is really funny for ironic for a god to be agnostic, right? So his place within this, I guess in just a few minutes worth, his key turning point in the book is when he gets hooked on a mystery and gets sucked into the politics of the court of gods. And despite being convinced of his own worthlessness for most of the book, he realizes his own value just in time to miraculously heal the God King right at the climax. But I guess I don't know. Do we even want to go into the lots of detail about his role within the court of gods?
I would love you to continue lecturing about all of these very detailed plot lines.
Oh, all right. What do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about all of the twists. So the first time that I read this book, the whole Denth and Tonkfa being evil totally threw me.
Yeah.
Did not see it coming.
Yeah. I feel like this is definitely one of the twistier books, and that one in particular.
I am also terrible. I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but I always think that the narrators are trustworthy. So if I have to read, if you hand me an unreliable narrator book, I will never see it coming.
Well, and I want to be fooled, right? They're charming, and I want to be charmed.
Well, Denth is.
Denth is, right. Tonkfa is terrible and supposed to be terrible, right? But, and Jules and Claude,
Denth
too.
is able to play it off in a way you're like, yeah
it's just mercenary
humor. Yeah. Sure.
What's the worst part of being a mercenary?
This is making me uncomfortable. Yeah. I will ignore it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did not see that one coming.
Yeah.
That whole God King, like such a terrible ruler kind of a thing, and then him, turning around and not really being able to speak or communicate. Like, it was terrifying. Like even on the second or third read this time, like it was terrifying for Ciri to be in that room, and
where she's afraid, she's been told that if she so much as looks at the God King, let alone touches him, that she's gonna die, that he'll be offended and put her to death.
Mm-hmm. And then Blue Fingers. I'm like, the foreshadowing for that is so subtle.
Yeah, I feel like I could have done with a few more references to, hey, watch out for, I know that he says it one or two times, that Lightsong advises Ciri hey, what you need to do is you need to be average. You need to be what people expect until you're ready to strike. Like, I feel like we could have done with a few more references of that, and especially around Blue Fingers.
I don't know. I just, I think it was genius. I mean, the scribes or the other workers in the palace, you're really not supposed to think much of them.
Yeah.
And you don't think much of them until,
well, like, in how many books or TV shows, like, are they ever a focus point in like The Crown? No, you focus on the royalty, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, didn't. And then Vasher being one of the 5 scholars, and the fact that he and Denth are returned.
Yeah, well, and like they built up the mystery around Denth insisted Vasher couldn't have killed Arsteel in a fair fight. He couldn't have done it in a duel. There's no way. Vasher was never a good duelist. And
then to figure out how he did it.
Yeah, and then you see it at the end.
Yeah, so I did not see any of the twists coming on my first read.
Yeah, but especially the one with Denth betraying Vivenna. That one is telegraphed so well that you see it on all of the rereads.
Oh, on the rereads, it's so obvious. Yeah. But yeah. One of the other things I want to talk about was the relationship between the 5 scholars is, I feel like, kind of complicated and not spelled out.
Yeah. And it's spelled out more in the annotations than it is in the actual book, which I'm not super a big fan of. Like, I feel like if
Brandon has so much in his head. He sets up these worlds with so detailed. But he can't just put in all the superfluous stuff in.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't like speaking of being annoyed by me lecturing, I got annoyed at Vasher's info dump on Vivenna partway through when explaining about Awakening.
Well, I think that's supposed to be a little annoying, and I think you're not really supposed to understand what he's saying. You're just supposed to get the idea of this guy knows a shit ton.
Yeah.
Like, he's way more than anybody else.
A researcher, or maybe a scholar, or maybe one of the capital F, capital S 5 scholars.
We should probably also explain. So all of the 5 scholars are returned. They don't appear as returned because they, what's the word? Suppress their divine breath.
Yes.
So when you suppress your divine breath, you then become normal sized rather than the enlarged return sized. And their bodies still they consume 1 breath a week. Just these 5 scholars people have been consuming other breaths.
Yeah. Well, and
I don't know where they get all of these breaths to be lasting this many years, but
yeah. Well, and I think that's part of it is just he's not going to spell that out. You fill in the gaps however you want, really. I hope. I don't know, man.
I don't know. Maybe we'll find out more.
Yeah, but we know.
Okay, so going back to the relationships between the 5 scholars. So there's a set of brothers.
Arsteel and Yestiel, and yeah.
Okay, and then there's a brother and sister.
Oh yeah, Denth and Shashara.
And then you have Vasher as the 5th wheel, kind of.
Yeah, but Vasher married Shashara. And together they created Nightblood.
Yes. And then, so by the end of the book, only 2 of them are alive.
Yes, because Vasher killed the other 3. Vasher.
So Vasher killed Shashara because she
in the many
war.
Yeah, because she was going to disseminate more widely how to make Nightblood type super weapons,
which would not be helpful.
Yeah.
Vasher also killed Arsteel
in a duel.
So Denth actually got Arsteel's body and made him lifeless. So that is Claude.
Yep.
So Claude is Arsteel.
Yep. And then Arsteel's and then we Denth is one of the main characters, obviously.
Denth is one of the main characters who was killed at the end of this book.
And then Yestiel is off screen. We don't know what he's up to.
But that he's supposed to play a big part in the sequel.
In the eventual sequel.
So you have 2 of the 5 scholars that are still alive, plus you have 1 as a lifeless.
Yep.
Which is heavily implied in the books that the lifeless are more alive than what the people at the time think they are.
Yep.
Also going back to kind of the Shashara and Nightblood, if you remember, there's a scene in Warbreaker where Lightsong is looking at the art.
And his brother / head priest Scoot just sees it as just a bunch of red.
But Lightsong kind of, because he has so much, because of his heightening his divine breath, he actually is more intuitive to what people's intent was when they're painting. So he was able to look at the painting, kind of see the intent there, and be able to see Shashara being killed by Nightblood. Or was she holding Nightblood?
It could be both. We don't really know the details around how she was killed by Nightblood, but we do know that Vasher somehow killed Shashara with Nightblood.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk? Is this a good time to talk about how Nightblood works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to go off on.
Do we know how
again.
Nightblood works?
We know in some ways. We see on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as they explain on in Warbreaker, Vasher and Shashara made Nightblood with 1,000 breaths, and they awakened a sword, and they told it one beautiful simple command: destroy evil. But they didn't realize it would become sentient in the process, and they didn't realize that a sentient sword doesn't know what evil means. So it
has trouble.
It has trouble. It desperately wants to destroy evil, but it has no idea how to figure out if something's good or evil. It also it leaks black smoke whenever it's withdrawn, and it also feeds upon the breaths of whoever wields it, right?
Mm-hmm. And it consumes them faster the longer you hold it.
It consumes
exponential growth,
right?
Exponential eating.
Yeah, it's a hungry sword. And then in the climax, when we see it drawn all the way, and Vasher basically he destroys a fucking castle with it, right? Where he talks about he
because he'll plunge it into the ceiling,
and then there's a 10-foot hole in the ceiling, right? So it is in so many ways a super weapon, but he worries that if he can't get it back in its sheath in time and he runs out of breaths, it will eat him as well. Right. So that's sort of Nightblood. There's also
and Nightblood can speak into people's brains.
Yep.
Or minds.
And the other thing is, Vasher uses Nightblood as a judge of character, where if you are greedy or vengeful or
evil
or inherently evil, right? And you see Nightblood, we see this in several scenes where he won't actually do anything to fight back, little minions, token
he will
bad
just
guys.
Leave the sword out and let people destroy themselves with it.
Right. They lust after the sword, they fight over it, and then whoever is the last one left standing, holding Nightblood,
the evil person,
the last evil person will they'll
kill themselves.
Yeah, they'll kill themselves because they still feel compelled to destroy evil too.
But if you are not inherently evil, the sword just makes you.
It's so repulsive. It's so
it makes you nauseous.
Yeah, it makes them nauseous. And so Vivenna repeatedly, whenever she tries to hold Nightblood, she starts, she gets sick, right?
Yeah, and the reason why Vasher can hold on to the sword without getting sick is that apparently when you can wield the sword and have it consume your breaths, that kind of indoctrinates you.
Inoculate. Yeah.
Huh?
Inoculate. Yeah. So you no longer get sick from holding it.
Right.
So that's Nightblood. But that's also so it's unclear whether Vasher tricked Shashara into using Nightblood until she was consumed by it, or did he draw Nightblood and strike her with the sword? We don't know, because there's multiple ways that she could.
Well, Dent certainly thinks that he killed her.
Yes, but does that mean that he tricked her into drawing? There's two ways it could have happened.
Right? Yeah.
So that's Nightblood, Shashara, the Five Scholars.
The end of the book came very quickly.
Yeah, I don't really like the ending to this one. This one felt like there was 2 or 3 Deus Ex Machinas, one right after the other.
What is the definition of Deus Machina again?
So it means God from the machine, and that's when it's sort of a trope from ancient Greek plays, is what I understand, where they would just have a god descend from the heavens and say, oh, yeah, well.
And fix everything.
And fixes everything, right? And so at the end of the book, everything's looking hopeless. And then Light Song, and this one is earned, right? Light Song heals Susebron, so Susebron gets his tongue back, and so he, becomes a god. Not he doesn't descend from the heavens. He comes up from the caverns underneath the palace and fixes everything at the palace, right?
But I'm fine with that.
Yes.
But then it's like, okay, so
but then
Bluefinger successfully got the Lifeless Army to be heading towards Idris.
Yeah, but that's where it feels a little bit unearned, is that there's the statues around town are suddenly revealed to, it turns out those were Kalad's phantoms the whole time.
Those were heavily foreshadowed.
I missed it again on the reread. I was looking out for it.
He time and time again they talked about the statues all over the city and how lifelike they were and how detailed. There were so many.
And they're dressed like soldiers, and who even does that anyway? So gaudy. But still, I don't know, man. It's they're using them to go catch up with the Lifeless Army.
But this whole thing, the whole book was kind of revolving around, is there going to be war or not? And at the end of the day, it was like, there's an army. And then it was just like a quick...
Oh, wait, no, never mind. We're going to,
never mind. We're just going to... Here's this other army. We're just going to use that to stop the other one. And by the way, that's going to happen off screen. We're not even going to confirm that was successful before the book ends.
So, I mean, that was the overarching source of tension in the book, but it's not what the book is about.
I know,
right?
But
the book is
still
about their, how they grow as characters and the way they interact with each other, right? Yeah.
It felt like suddenly we ran out of time. We ran out of pages.
It felt a little bit like the end of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yes.
Where the police car just shows up.
The first time you showed me that movie, I was just like,
what?
Wait, what? What do you mean they just get in the car and the movie ends? What?
Yeah.
It felt very much like that, yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it feels.
I mean, we don't even get the confirmation that the statue Lifeless successfully...
Well, it's because it doesn't...
It's just taken for granted that, yes.
Yeah.
It's only in the annotations where it's Brandon's like, well, yeah, of course it worked.
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
and that's...
How are we supposed to know that?
Yeah, and I think that's part of my beef.
Everything
with this
that
book.
could go wrong has gone wrong in this story. Why would we take it for granted that would work?
So I do this is I think this is a very good standalone fantasy novel, right? I really, really enjoy it. I enjoy it more on a reread because you can go and read the annotations with it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they do, even though they have spoilers for later on in the book, and even though it's a little bit of, I think the annotations help make it a more complete story, and I hate that. But I love, I have such mixed feelings about it. Ugh. But, yeah.
Not my favorite. It was way less confusing on this reread.
Well, and that's part of why the annotations are so valuable, is because there's so many people that are trying to trick each other, or people who think they're trying to trick, that others are trying to trick them. Nobody's trustworthy, but sometimes they're telling the truth and sometimes they're not. And so it helps, there's a lot of uncertainty. And then, reading
such as life.
I know, right? But sometimes I just want to escape. And so going into the annotations, Brando Sando breaks it down and says, and here someone's being truthful, or here, and this explicitly was a lie.
You know what kind of hit me this time? Is that no one had said that Returned couldn't be Awakeners. In the first half of the movie, before we could see that happening. No one actually...
Movie?
Did I say movie?
You
book.
did.
The book in the first half of the book. No one explicitly said that Return couldn't be Awakeners.
Right,
But somehow, I do remember that being kind of a shock on my first read.
Yeah.
I'm like...
Well, because if they give up their breath, they just need to make sure they don't give up more,
So it's just why didn't I think about that?
Well,
I mean, Brandon very carefully presented these things as kind of separate things.
Yup.
But they're not separate.
Nope. So, yeah, I agree, though, that the most important theme of the book is the reversals. But I don't know. Something that stood out on this read through for me was just how this one strikes me in particular as a critique of capitalism in a way and the excessiveness of it, where it reminded me so much of like late stage capitalism memes I see on Reddit sometimes. And the way the juxtaposition between Vivenna's story, which largely takes place in the ghettos, and the contrast between that and the Siri and Lightsong chapters, where everything is so luxurious and there's just so much extravagance that the gods can't even experience all of it. That really struck me this time. And I thought about, here, in our late stage capitalistic society, we worry about things like single-use plastics. But the court of gods had things like single-use plants, single-use paintings that they burn after appreciating. And Siri had single-use clothes and clothes that were less than single-use, right?
Yeah, the clothes that were never used.
Right, and that just and that struck me as I don't know. I noticed it this time, and the scene of Lightsong feeding on the breath of that child. It somehow struck me that those in top of this excessive society also need to exploit the people at the bottom, where they literally need to feed on the life force of the other, right? And
yeah, I mean, it's bothersome.
Yeah, it's weird.
Sure.
It's certainly it certainly feels like there's like the society is only possible because of exploitation. And for so many of the gods, I feel like Lightsong is kind of the exception in that way. But for so many of them, like the intent is that the people will support those gods because they are capable of these great healings, and the expectation is the gods will perform a miraculous healing. They will prophesy. They will share their prophetic dreams. They'll do these great things. But only Lightsong really does any of that.
No, that's not true. What's her name?
Mercy Star? No, not Mercy Star. Allmother?
Allmother was
And
actually trying
Calmseer?
to help every single one of the petitioners.
Right, but she is portrayed as another exception, right?
Yes.
The court of gods as a whole is portrayed as self-absorbed and decadent.
I think that's something that he teased and left open for the sequel to talk about that, because there were so many instances where they talked about how things used to be and how the gods used to be better.
Yeah.
Or there used to be more and all of this other stuff, which it makes me think that there's a Cosmere connection in there for the difference. So maybe we talk about this in the next episode.
Yeah, we can talk about the next episode. I think that there's reasons that don't need Cosmere connections, but we can talk about it next time. The other big theme I saw in this book, and I think he even mentioned it as something unintentional in the annotations, but this in this read through, I definitely saw this as a metaphor for the Iraq War.
It's not supposed to be.
I know it's not supposed to be, but unintentional, intentional or not, like the parallels are there, right? Where
I didn't pay attention to the world until Trump was elected. So
all right, but like the parallels are that there's this big long drawn out discussion in the court of gods or Congress, whatever, about do those small rebels over across the way, are they a threat to us? Right? Do they have weapons of mass destruction? Are they plotting terrorist acts against us? It definitely struck me as the parallels are there.
Okay.
Yeah, and we see it through we see this book through the perspective of definitely kind of aligned with the big Hallandren superpower, because Ceres, the queen, and Lightsong is one of the gods there.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately everybody wants to avoid the conflict, which yeah, good, appreciate that.
Except for Bluefingers. So most people who read this, Siri and Lightsong are like their favorite.
Right. I mean, I don't know.
Lightsong for me was just way too melodramatic and too much outward internal monologuing. I remember liking him on my first read, like excited for his chapters, and on this read I was just like, get over yourself, dude.
No, I still like him. And for Light Song, there was when he first starts getting hooked on the murder mystery, right? Where he's trying to figure out who broke in to the tunnels and who broke into Mercy Star's palace, things like that.
I love the fact that his brother was his high priest.
Oh yes. Well, I love that. I love that too. But like I saw, he was like, "Who was I?" I love to solve a good problem, and I was just like, "Yeah, I'm excited for you too, dude. I work in quality. I love a good investigation and figuring out a problem."
And he was an investigator. He just would investigate,
tax fraud, accounting
books.
Yeah. No, I love it. And as someone who is also, I sit in my armchair and look at paperwork and try to investigate problems that way. I love it.
No, my favorite twist is that his high priest was his brother. No idea how, like, having siblings myself, no idea how you can fucking hold it together and not tell them, or not just be like,
well,
to actually like treat a sibling like a god.
Well, and I think that was that reveal was the emotional climax of the book for me, right? Mm-hmm. The emotional reveal that Larmar or Scoot was, Light Song's brother before Light Song returned, followed by Light Song's, flashback into, the moment that he died, the first time. Mm-hmm. Like that was definitely the emotional climax for me. I'm not saying I was brought to tears this time, but maybe in previous read-throughs. It was so touching.
Well, this book definitely hits you.
So there's a moment in the book that stood out to me very strongly this read-through, but I don't think I noticed it in the first read-through because it's, it's overshadowed by the surprise of Denth betraying Vivenna in the very next scene. And that's when Vivenna is meeting with Idrians in the city, and for once she's not actually doing anything that's a crime, but then they get broken up by the lifeless soldiers and the police.
So when she was meeting with the slumlords.
Yes, but she wasn't doing it, like she was just trying to build goodwill in the community. She wasn't, for once she wasn't actually trying to do anything that was a crime, right? She was asking for their support in very vague and nebulous ways. Like, okay, the intent is clearly there to be a conspiracy, but I remember thinking this time, like, it's funny that she gets busted right here. But that scene stood out to me very much, reading it on the other side.
With the slumlords, or when she was trying to run away from the lifeless?
Yes, because don't they run right into the other?
Yeah.
So it stood out to me very much, being on the other side of like the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. And I was thinking about this in the perspective of there's a long history in the USA of protests and violent crackdowns on congregations of minorities that really become much more violent once the police are involved. So like in this scene, reading the scene of the lifeless closing in on Vivenna, I was picturing, the scenes we saw I see my history books of civil rights protesters being sprayed with water cannons, or Vietnam War protesters being shot at in colleges, or the Occupy Wall Street folks who are already, detained and handcuffed being pepper sprayed. It reminded me very much of instances of police brutality in the real world. And I was particularly horrified by that scene this read through, and in a way that I hadn't been in previous read throughs, because it just tends to get overshadowed by the much more personal betrayal the next scene, right?
Yes.
So, and I don't know. I understand why they had to,
I try not to think about the real world, because fantasy is supposed to be an escape. So I purposely try not to find connections to the outside world.
But here's the thing. Now that we're like actually reading it and like trying to take it apart and explain it and things like that, I'm seeing things that I don't normally see,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Shucks. Were there any other scenes or moments that stood out to you? Oh, I do want to talk about one.
Okay. Which one is that?
Ciri's fake orgasm scene. The one where she, gets down to...
Oh, I remember you reading it and you're like, I don't remember it being so awkward. I'm like,
it wasn't cringy. But the only... in this...
That doesn't bother me.
No. Well, and it bothered me this time until I thought about God. Yeah, I was just like, all right, she's hamming it up, whatever, for the priests who are listening in and making sure that they're having sex, whatever. And that, I was cringing at it, but then I was like, well, wait a minute. Think about another fake orgasm scene in popular culture. And I thought about it.
When Harry met Sally?
Yeah, when Harry met Sally. And I thought about that, and suddenly I enjoyed it so much more.
Okay.
Because, that's a great scene from a pretty good movie that I, honestly only remember that one scene because it's such a standout one. But anyway.
I thought it was great.
Great.
I didn't think it was that awkward, but.
It made me cringe. Let's see, are there any other scenes, themes that stood out in your read-through? Just done talking to me?
No, I'm just trying to think back because I've already started reading. What is it?
Well of Ascension.
Well of Ascension.
Yep.
I really am terrible with the titles of the Mistborn books. No, the one thing that stood out to me a little bit more this reread was that the chemistry between Vasher and Vivenna. Like, they definitely have something going on. And, like, enough so that Nightblood even picked up on it.
That something is friendship.
No, it's not. No, it is not.
He's
okay.
100 times your age.
And if you think, this is kind of a spoiler, if you think of what happens in
the next time
Stormlight,
we see them.
Stormlight Archive, like the fact that she's that Vivenna or Azure is looking for Vasher, or what's his name in.
Let's save it for the next episode.
Anyways, the fact that she's looking for him, and like she's looking for him like a scorned lover kind of a thing.
I don't know.
Like their bond is no. Next time you do the reread, look out for signs of it because there's a lot. There's some heavy hints there. It's there. It's there, listeners.
I just don't.
Please email Nick and tell him that this is a thing. Because he's not going to believe me.
All right. Well, thanks for podcasting with me, and thanks for listening. If you want to email us and tell me how wrong AJ is, that the chemistry between them
and if we have to wait for another Stormlight book or the sequel to this, you're going to see that I'm right.
Our email address
I can wait for that payoff.
Is cosmerecasual@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is licensed through Tribe of Noise. The artist is Ketza. The song is Odyssey. Email us, cosmerecasual@gmail.com. Tell AJ she's wrong.
And until next time, keep your wits about you.